Today's webinar is on the Community Safety Scorecard that was developed for the City of Los Angeles. We have two excellent presenters, which I'm so pleased and so grateful to introduce. Our first is Maribel Meza, who received a bachelor's degree from UCLA with a major in political science, concentrating in American politics, and two minors in public policy and Chicano studies. Prior to joining the Urban Peace Team with the Advancement Project, she worked for UCLA Bruins Corporation, a community service project, probably Bruin Corps, and for EdBoost Education as a source advisor. Maribel is interested in helping youth and local leaders address the issues that push many kids and teens into a life of gangs. She is also going to get a master's in public policy. Next, I'd like to introduce Billy Weiss, who is the Associate Director of the Southern California Injury Prevention Research Center at the UCLA School of Public Health. Since 1990, Billy Weiss has pioneered public health research that helps community-based organizations become more effective in preventing violence. And I want to add to Billy's biography here that in early 2000, Billy worked with the Monterey County Health Department and our violent injury prevention efforts in Salinas that were at that time led by a public health nurse. Some of you may remember Diana Jacobson. Billy serves as the Executive Director Emeritus and founder of the Violence Prevention Coalition of Greater Los Angeles and is co-chair of the Unity Network, which is Urban Networks to Increase Thriving Youth. And we've had a couple of presentations from Prevention Institute, which along with CDC and other partners has organized the Unity Network. She is a national, the Unity Network is a national initiative designed to strengthen and support local efforts to prevent violence in the nation's largest cities. Prior to serving as the Associate Director of the Injury Prevention Research Center at UCLA, Billy directed the Injury and Violence Prevention Program at the LA County Department of Public Health. She has authored a number of papers and book chapters and received a host of other honors, most notably the California Peace Prize from the California Wellness Foundation in 2008. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maribel and Billy, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, for that. And thank you, everybody on the call, for joining in. Like Linda said, we're going to be doing the presentation on the Community Safety Scorecard that was released in June of 2011 for the City of LA. So, Billy, I think we should talk a little bit more about the organizations before we delve in a little bit deeper into the scorecard. So do you want to go ahead and talk about VPC?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The VPC is a network of public and private organizations and individuals. It was formed in 1991 through a grant from the state EPIC program to the Department of Health Services in LA, now the LA County Department of Public Health. The VPC is currently an independent nonprofit under the fiscal sponsorship of community partners and is housed in the California Endowment Building in downtown Los Angeles. A current area of interest and work focuses on the integration of violence prevention into the place-based strategies, focusing on healthy communities and chronic disease prevention. VPC provides information and training to CBOs around issues of violence prevention, policy development, program evaluation, hospital-based intervention, reentry, and provides ongoing technical assistance to public and private organizations working on public health approaches to preventing violence, including DV, teen relationship violence, gang violence, sexual assault, bullying, etc. Members include folks working in the arts, government, the media, public health, universities, mental health, gang intervention, victim and survivor support. And since you sound like you're a group of public health folks, you know that we use the broadest definition of violence prevention strategies. It has partnered with the Advancement Project on several projects, and we continue to work together on areas of mutual concern and interest, including the Advancement Project report on gang violence in Los Angeles. The VPC consulted with Healthy City and partnered with the Advancement Project to help produce a scorecard. which Maribel will describe. And I hope that this is helpful to all of you, and just keep in mind that we're available to help and answer questions at any time.
Okay, thank you, Billy. And so the Advancement Project, briefly, also is a national nonprofit policy action think tank. We have offices in D.C., Sacramento, and Los Angeles, which is where I'm located. In the LA office, we have 4 different project areas. Like Billy mentioned, Healthy City, which is one of our project areas, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's really an amazing statewide GIS mapping platform that is free to use. Has hundreds of indicators which you can map according to pretty much any geography you wish. And they also provide TA around data and mapping to CBOs, public sector, private sector, and others. Another one of our program areas is educational equity. Their focus is on ensuring access to school facilities from preschool to high school. One of the charges that they're leading right now, they're behind Prop 38, Our Children, Our Future, which is an initiative that will provide funding to go directly to the schools and will prohibit Sacramento from using that money. And Equity in Public Funds, which is our newest program area. It's still developing, but their focus is essentially on trying to ensure that the money that is being funneled from the federal, state, and local governments is actually going to the communities that need it most. And Urban Peace, which is the program area that I represent, we work to help to reduce and prevent community violence through a public health approach. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the beginnings of Urban Peace just briefly, because I think it's important for the larger discussion about the Community Safety Scorecard. As Billy mentioned, the Advancement Project was commissioned by the City of Los Angeles, particularly by the Ad Hoc Committee on Youth Development and Gang Violence, to write a report about the way that the city was attacking the issue of community and gang violence. And Billy was one of our best experts on that table. In it, we basically set forth over 100 recommendations where we called for the city to use a public health approach to address the issue of violence, and also asked the city to focus their funding in the communities with the highest levels of violence. So because of this report, the Mayor Villaraigosa, responded to that pressure and established a similar model that we advocated for in the report, with the creation of the city's Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office. I don't know if you guys have heard of the GRID office, but it established 12 zones throughout the city. Each of these zones receive $1 million in prevention and $500,000 in intervention funding. We were happy about this change, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that this funding in these communities wasn't a cookie-cutter approach, that it needed to be specific to the community, to the assets in the community, and to the conditions that exist in the community. So we advocated for the development of comprehensive community needs assessments for each area, and Urban Peace was commissioned to do 8 out of those 12 needs assessments. And basically what those are just very thorough assessments about the crime and the gang dynamics, the assets, the gaps on the ground, and the conditions in the community. So I just wanted to briefly mention that because I feel that the larger goals of the scorecard are kind of reflective on the call to action report and a lot of our research that we've done through the needs assessments. Okay, so what is it? So let's talk about the scorecard now, right? So in collaboration, Advancement Project, Urban Peace in collaboration with VPC and Healthy City, developed this scorecard which simulates a report card with letter grades from A to F for each zip code in the city of Los Angeles using 4 community conditions. And I'll talk a little bit more deeply about each of these, but the things that we measured were violence levels. For us, violence levels or safety in a community is, obviously the larger outcome of the conditions that have been in place in the different communities. And some of those conditions are reflected by the state of the schools, the risk factors, and the protective factors that exist. So like I mentioned, what were the goals of the report? So I'm sure you guys have been hearing, particularly in the last couple of years that the City of LA has been experiencing record crime reduction. And so we're happy that that's taking place, and we know that there are particular communities in the City of LA that have unusually high levels of safety, and there's other communities in the City of Los Angeles that unfortunately don't. And so we wanted to kind of focus on that and not lose sight of the fact that despite the fact that there's been overarching crime reductions within the city, we have not sufficiently reduced the risk factors that cause trauma and violence in some of the poorest neighborhoods. And so we wanted to continue to highlight the fact that these areas could need a long-term sustainable strategy that will stay with them for a while, because these are conditions that unfortunately will not become uprooted in just a couple of years. So we wanted to be able to measure this public safety and equity that exists in the City of Los Angeles, despite the fact that there's been large reductions in crime. Still, like I said, focusing on areas that still needed most, and not say, well, we've already reduced crime, why are we investing in these communities? Well, we wanted to show that there's still a need in these areas.
And can I just interject for a minute?
Absolutely, yes.
Maribel. So the reduction is in crime. Violence is a different measurement, so just to be cognizant of that.
Right. So exactly, the reduction in crime. So we also wanted to develop a tool that tracks the impact of ongoing violence reduction strategies over time. One of the biggest things that I think we all can agree on is that there is a need for an implementation of data-driven policies. And we feel that the scorecard can be helpful in informing those types of strategies and initiatives that are needed in each area by focusing on which sector might need the most investment or what sector is lacking the most. And we feel that as initiatives are moving forward, the scorecard can help in allowing those strategies to be a little bit more nimble by informing, the changes that are happening in each sector as the initiatives move forward. Okay, so before we talk about what we found, we know that a lot of you guys are evaluation experts and public health experts, so we wanted to kind of focus heavily on the methodology of the scorecard. So as part of all of the research that we've been doing with Billy and the call to action report and the city needs assessments, we've done needs assessments pretty much all over the country. We really understood the conditions on the ground that allowed for violence and gangs to flourish. So we wanted to engage in a process to organize all of those observations, and we wanted to also be more intentional about how we address those conditions. And so we engaged in an 18-month process where we sat down and tried to identify what were those conditions in the community that allowed violence to flourish. We wanted it to be something that is true of any urban neighborhood, but also that captured the complexities of the City of Los Angeles. And these are the 10 root conditions that we identified, and we could talk more about them if you guys wish. But among them are the lack of targeted suppression that follows a community policing model, early academic failure and lack of school attachment, and the normalization of violence. But there's the entire list of the 10 root conditions that we identified. And so as we did that, we engaged in this logic model process. And here you see a visual representation of only one sub-root condition. So you can obviously see how exhaustive this process can be. Here we have I don't know if you guys can see it. I can't really see it that well on my computer, but the root condition is a lack of comprehensive primary prevention infrastructure, and the sub-root condition that we identified here, and obviously there could be more, is the lack of safe public spaces. That's something that we kept hearing about over and over and over again when we were doing our needs assessments, and obviously that decreased the level or feeling perceptions of safety for community members. And so we identified strategies, then we identified activities and measures. How can we measure that those strategies and those activities were going to be successful? And a lot of the measures that we identified, we then were some of the ones that we wanted to use as part of the indicators for the scorecard. So we ended up with over 1,400 data points. Obviously, we didn't use all of those. but that's essentially what we did. We engaged in literature review process as we were doing this because we wanted to make sure that we identified best practices, and we made sure that, I guess, our observations were also being backed up by some, some academic somewhere or some other research project that had been done across the country. Billy, did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this logic model process that we went through during this adventure, really, because it was an adventure for everybody. It was something nobody had done before, is really much more extensive and a bit different than the logic models you're used to seeing in public health. So for every root condition, there was a separate, exhaustive logic model done like this one. So it's a bit different than what we're used to in public health, but it certainly got at a lot of the issues we talk about.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Excel sheet, the document ended up being over 100 pages just of so much data, so much information that we were finding as we were doing our logic model. So, okay, so a little bit more on the methodology. So once we kind of did this entire research, we started to try to identify available data set indicators. So that obviously dwindled all of our kind of indicators that we wanted to use down a lot, because we had to obviously keep under consideration the availability of the data, right? Whether it was available at the geography that we needed it, whether the data sources were accurate, how reliable they were, were the data sets clean, were they not, was it up-to-date information, was it even collected? A lot of the indicators that we really wanted to use, unfortunately, were not collected at the geography that we needed them, which we decided would be at the zip code level, because it was kind of a nice balance between focused and a little bit also broad. And so that dwindled down a lot of the indicators that we could use. So after we did all that, we did a correlation analysis with the indicators that were left to identify the factors that most strongly related to safety outcomes. So the indicators that somehow impacted safety, or that were statistically correlated by plus or minus 6, those were the ones that were included, and obviously that further dwindled our data set, which was fine because we wanted to make sure that we included really robust indicators. And in the back of the report, there's going to be a link actually at the end of this presentation to the actual report, and you could see our correlation table and all of the different data sets that we kind of wanted to use, but unfortunately we couldn't because they weren't statistically correlated. So at the end, we ended up with a set of 17 indicators, and those we divided into 4 categories, right, of safety, school conditions, risk, and protective factors. Each category has a minimum of 3 indicators, and I'll go through them right now. Also, the indicators were weighted equally to construct that final index score, and we can talk a little bit more about that in the data analysis slide. And they were also ranked among all City of LA zip codes to kind of see how they fared against each other, and we used a quintile system. So basically the top 20% of the zip codes that received an A, the top 20%, I should say, received an A, second 20% a B, and so on until the bottom 20% received a letter of an F. Okay. So these were the data indicators that we ultimately ended up using for safety. We did gang-related crime, violent crime, and child abuse rate. For risk factors, percent of families in poverty, unemployment, single-parent families, and then both high school and middle school students scoring below basic in English. And for school conditions, we measured the API at the high school level, and at the middle school and high school level, the truancy rate and the high school graduation rate. And for protective factors, we measured violence prevention services rate, youth violence prevention nonprofit revenue per capita, and percent of high school and middle school teachers with full credentials, and percent of active voting population. Okay, so talk a little bit more deeply about some of our limitations is the fact that grades are relative to each other. So if we were to redo the scorecard again with the same methodology, then it would be difficult for us to see which zip code went up or down relative to each other. We did not use an external grading criteria, which is the weighing that I was talking about. Partly also because in our research, there wasn't any consensus on which indicator kind of should be weighed more heavily. It didn't say like, high school API is much more important than truancy rate, for example. So it was kind of hard for us to assign that weighing, but that was, a limitation.
So just to interject again here,
sure, please do.
Maribel. So if we have the opportunity to do this again, we plan to use an expected number so that we can actually come up with some criterion so that we can each zip code would be measured then against their expected indicators, what their expected levels would be, so that we actually can measure progress in each zip code as opposed to just comparing one to the other.
Absolutely. That's definitely something that we want to do as we do the second iteration of this. Also, some community factors that could represent community conditions on the ground were not used due to the unavailability of data. So, for example, something that we came across over and over and over in our research as a very strong protective factor actually was community cohesion. But unfortunately, that's something that is not collected. So we do want to do like a data advocacy project where we can possibly collect this level of data. So how do we define community cohesion? I see the question from Ashley. I think it depends, but for us, the level of community cohesion is really the amount of trust that neighbors kind of have for each other, how much they talk to each other. One of the things that we've found in the past, particularly in one of the housing developments in South LA, where we've actually done the needs assessments, we do measure community cohesion, is kind of how much do youth respect their elders, how much do they respond to what they say. So it's a whole host of things of how we define community cohesion, but just one tiny example on that is in this particular housing development, there was a particular family, a grandma, who was able to diffuse a lot of conflicts because she was the grandma of that community. So that level of community cohesion was for us a little bit of protective factor in that area. Okay, and then also a few of the zip codes did have missing data. Some of them, particularly zip codes around UCLA or USC didn't have large numbers of population, so we couldn't use them. Some zip codes also, we were unable to get LAUSD data. LAUSD is a school district. So adjustments were made when one of the indicators were not, when we didn't have data for one of the indicators, then we just kind of used the rest of the indicators to measure the index for that particular sector. Okay. All right. So now that we've kind of put it all out there about the methodology and our limitations, what does it tell us? So like we've been saying, it did reveal public safety and equity in Los Angeles. And we feel that the fact that we used the zip code geographic level was good in allowing us to be specific to the community and also kind of broad, like I said. There's a lot of scorecards out there that we encountered during our research. A lot of them, for example, the county or United Way, which are incredibly great scorecards, but they measured it at the county level. So it's really difficult for particular communities to kind of measure their own progress, measure like how they are each doing within their immediate communities, and it didn't really allow to kind of see the complexity of each of these areas. And so this, at the zip code level, it really allowed to pinpoint what the most safe and unsafe zip codes were. And obviously it was the first to offer data by categorizing measures or conditions by risk factors, protective factors, and the school conditions. And something that we also found is that all of these factors, the school conditions, the risk factors, and the protective factors, they were all very closely interrelated, and they jointly informed the level of safety in a community. And in addition to all that, I think that something really important is that despite the inequity that exists, each community does have a unique array of assets, which we feel should be used to elevate the safety in the community, or should be used for any strategy really that is decided upon in that particular area. So here we have a more zoomed in version of the scorecard map. So you can obviously see the red, the orange and the red, those are the communities that received Ds and Fs in safety. And again, this is just for safety. Okay, so more specifically, like I said, we found that when any one of the categories of the scorecard is at an F, the rest of the categories are also affected. So here you could see in this zip code 90068 that F in school conditions really brought down the protective factors and the risk factors. We also found that many of the zip codes that were graded least safe were located across multiple jurisdictions. So cross-city areas, unincorporated areas, or multiple city council districts. Just from our needs assessments data, and particularly in South LA, this multi-jurisdictional issue kept coming up. There was areas where community members would call, let's say LAPD, and they would say, well, on what side of the street did this crime take place? Oh, they said this street. Oh, well, that actually is jurisdiction of sheriff department. So then they would call sheriff department, and sheriff department would be like, no, that's LAPD. So this kind of passing the buck obviously decreases the level of safety in communities. Some of the zip codes where protective factors were high, and thus we would expect the risk factors to be low, actually had grades of D or F in the risk factors. And so a closer look at these zip codes shows how investments in a single community sector are not enough to improve outcomes in the rest of the sectors. So that's essentially what we say when we, with the strategy that we call the comprehensive community violence reduction strategy, where you need to have all sectors working together to elevate the conditions on the ground. And just one sector alone is not going to be able to lift all of the conditions. So here, for example, we could see that in this zip code, they had really good protective factors, but unfortunately that didn't translate into the risk factors or the school conditions. So the question for these zip codes is, how can you use those amazing protective factors that you already have to kind of decrease the risk factors and increase safety, right? So now that this community knows that they have these amazing protective factors, let's leverage those assets to, like I said, elevate those conditions in that community. Similarly here, you could see how the the protective factors were really high. They were, I think they spend over $12,000, or they have over $12,000 per capita on youth violence prevention nonprofit revenue, but yet safety is really bad, there's high amounts of risk factors, so there's a lot of assets there, but are they leveraging those assets correctly? So in general, we feel the scorecard highlights where the community and the public and private sectors need to concentrate their resources to ensure basic safety to neighborhoods that are most heavily impacted by violence. And just really briefly on the future of the scorecard, like Billy mentioned, we do want to be able to release this periodically, but obviously we want to update the data. We want to make sure that we use a gold standard scoring criterion, and we'll definitely be willing to do more of these trainings, obviously, for other communities. And that's it. I don't know, Billy, if you wanted to add anything.
No, except to say that I think the really important part of this for public health is that using this type of a scorecard really does point out that there is inequitable spending across these different parts of the city. I mean, there's no big surprise that the areas with the highest levels of crime and lowest levels of safety are, this isn't any big revelation to the city fathers, but the fact that resources aren't being allocated to those parts of the city that need them the most is really what I think is particularly important. And the fact that this definitely shows that you've got to do a comprehensive approach. As Maribel said, you can't just focus on one sector. You really have to focus on the entire community, and the entire community must be involved.
This is Linda. I want to thank you. That was really wonderful. I have a question, and then I'll read a question that we have from Lynn McDonald. We have, in the city of Salinas, 3 zip codes as a small town. I'm wondering if you'd recommend using a different unit of measure. For example, census tracts might be a little bit too fine, or school districts. What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, part of it, unfortunately, depends on how the data are available. Mm-hmm. Census tract would actually be ideal because it would allow you to aggregate really data at one of the smaller levels. But most data in California now are no longer collected at the census tract level. School districts, not knowing how large your school district boundaries are, it's difficult to say. But something that definitely gives you the neighborhood is what I would recommend. So whether it's census tracts or school districts, if you can actually look at a neighborhood, because as you all know, neighborhoods change almost in a few blocks. Sometimes the census data from the U.S. Census are available down to the block level, but if you don't have other data that correlate with that, it makes it a little bit difficult to do this. So you really have to look at how your data are collected to help you make that decision.
Right. I agree with Billy. I think it depends on the availability of data and how the community defines each of their neighborhoods. And if you were to use census tract, like Billy said, you could then aggregate the data and kind of create your own boundaries and do that to focus your research.
That's interesting. Thank you. And that is a challenge to form neighborhoods for which you can also gather standardized and comparable data. I'm going to read Lynn's question. She asked if you had any surprise findings. Did your data shed light on any problems that you might not have picked up had you not done the scorecard?
Well, I think the biggest surprise is that if you allocate resources to only one sector, that it doesn't lift the whole neighborhood up. I think that was a surprise to us, although we knew there was unequal spending going on and unequal resources. I don't think we realized the impact it had on the whole neighborhood.
Right, I agree. I think also, in addition to that, we knew that obviously communities in South LA and East Los Angeles, experience this really high levels of violence, but just kind of seeing that contrast, absolutely dramatic contrast was, although we knew, surprising to me, and also focusing on each of these zip codes, particularly around the school conditions. There were some zip codes that had truancy data at like 90%. And so, I mean, that to me was incredibly surprising. And for us, in our model, we do see schools as the hub of the community and really the place where you can, put in a lot of services, where you can access the community much better and all that. And then just seeing those levels of truancy or such low API scores really kind of made you think of, okay, well, how can we fix those schools so that they can continue to be that hub of the community?
Yeah, and one other thing I should mention here, some of the measures that we think might be helpful to add in that we did not use in this one were, for example, we didn't use law enforcement resources. So they, whether they're allocating more or less resources into the neighborhoods of greatest need, was not available to us when we did this report. That's another thing we need to take into consideration. And I think as we move forward with this, what Maribel said about sort of the impact this had, just to mention, when this report first was coming out, Connie Rice, who's the director of the Urban Institute and the Advancement Project here in LA, really had to battle with the city fathers. They were terrified of this report coming out at first because they thought it was going to point up their inadequacies and where they weren't spending resources, and it was going to demonize neighborhoods and so forth. And what was really pointed out was that this really can be a helpful tool. It can help you allocate your resources more effectively and into the places of greatest need. LA, like most cities, you know, every city council person wants the same thing in their district, whether or not their need is great or not. And so this helped us show that you really do have to put resources into the places where they're needed most and stop this sort of jockeying for, you know, my council district needs it too, when actually, you know, we have law enforcement in areas where things are very, very safe, and, you know, they have a patrol car there 24/7, where in areas, you know, where the need is much greater, don't have sometimes the luxury of the same kind of protection.
And I think ties in with a question that we received from Ashley Clark. So as a result of pointing these differences out and these disparities out to the city fathers, were there any, did you see any additional investments, or did that translate into any sort of budget changes for the city?
Well, we haven't, because LA, like most cities, is dealing with the budget crisis, a huge one. We haven't seen any big announcements, but we have seen law enforcement really take a different tactic, and they are employing law enforcement resources much more strategically. And the fact that law enforcement is really willing to work with communities in a way they hadn't before has made a huge difference in what's going on in LA right now.
I did want to add on that question that despite the fact that there hasn't been an increase in funding or added funding, I think it's notable that all of the departments within the city were cut except for this department, except for the grid office. And that is pretty major because that wouldn't have been the case in any other time. And so although it didn't increase the funding, at least it didn't decrease it, and it maintained that funding. I wanted to add really quickly to what Billy was saying earlier when we did present this data to the mayors and all the deputies. At first, you know, all the deputies, like Billy said, were not very happy with this. But, you know, the mayor mentioned that for him, you know, obviously this would be something that underscores the fact that the grid and focusing the resources in these communities as opposed to dividing by 15, that this shows that that was the right strategy because you know, those are the areas that needed most, and that there's a need for a long-term sustainable investment in those areas. And so that validated the fact that there's a grid office and the fact that it needs to continue past this mayor.
Great, thank you very much. We received another question from Eric Johnson, who notes that, of course, we have very high levels of unemployment, and I believe that was one of the indicators that you looked at. Did you feel that because that situation of high unemployment exists, that masked any of your results? I know you didn't weight your indicators, so it would seem like that would just be one quality. Or what did the high unemployment rate have any sort of impact on what you found?
I think it's difficult to tell because some of the areas in Los Angeles have unemployment rates that are upwards of 20% in certain neighborhoods. But the fact that the crime rate is down, even in those neighborhoods, I think sort of masks the fact that we really couldn't tell the way we did this what unemployment by itself, what impact that had. I think those are some questions that as we get ready to do the next iteration of this, we would like to look at. The other thing is to figure out, once again, the observed and expected, but also to look at digging through the literature in a slightly different way and seeing whether or not these indicators have to be weighted differently than giving them all equal weight.
Right.
We have a question from Nina Rossetti, and she asks about your school data from Los Angeles Unified School District. Were there challenges in getting data from them? Was there not standardized data online that couldn't be used, or what were the?
So we got our LAUSD data from the California Department of Education, and there were some schools, particularly in the areas that received D's and F's in safety, that didn't report their data to California Department of Education. So I think there was only about 4 zip codes that didn't do this, but those were zip codes that we've actually done needs assessments in, so we were very familiar with them. So there was some challenges. In one of the zip codes in particular, one of the schools was undergoing a transition from being an LAUSD school to an LA Mayor's Partnership school. So for that particular year, they didn't collect the data.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's always frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the data issues are the biggest challenge when you go to do something like this. And we're very fortunate, and actually in the whole state of California, to have Healthy City who do collect a lot of these data indicators on a regular basis. But the data issue, particularly for those of you in public health who deal with data on a regular basis, can be very challenging, and getting people to share data is challenging, and that's why having a platform like Healthy City really helps this effort.
We had another question from Georgina Mendoza with the City of Salinas, and she asks what law enforcement is doing differently in Los Angeles, and I guess I might add to that, how did they receive your report?
So I can answer that. So what is law enforcement doing differently in LA? I don't know if you guys have heard of the Urban Peace Academy or the Los Angeles Violence Intervention Training Academy, but through that we've been training hardcore gang intervention workers, and a part of that is also training law enforcement, both LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department, to work with these intervention workers that have a license to operate, that have the ability to go into their communities and prevent retaliatory shootings, do rumor control, help build ceasefires and whatnot. And so we are training intervention workers to professionalize their field, but also training law enforcement officers to work with them and to understand their mutually independent roles and to just work together. We also have a very revolutionary model that we are implementing in 4 different housing developments, the 3 in Watts Imperial Courts, Nickerson Gardens, Jordan Downs, and 1 in East Los Angeles, Ramona Gardens, where it's called the Community Safety Partnership, where there's been 10 officers deployed to each of these communities, where they are supposed to do something completely different than arrest. They are supposed to build relationship. It's a relationship-based policing model. Build the trust with the community. Don't arrest, but actually refer youth and families to services. And so we truly want this to be a community policing model, and we've trained those 45 officers. And actually in Watts, there's been reductions of crime of upwards of 80%.
Yeah, and I just might add, at all of these trainings, we have a public health component of what the community building model looks like that goes into this training. But I think one of the most remarkable things about the training in the academy that goes on is that the gang interventionists designed their curriculum themselves, and they work on it with input from the academics and the professionals. But they train LAPD and the Sheriff's Department. When they hold training sessions, it's the gang interventionists that do the training. And I actually had a visitor out here from CDC one day and took him to one of the trainings to see it, and it was absolutely, his mind was blown to see law enforcement actually listening to the interventionists and what they had to say. So it's a very unique model, and LAPD has really changed in the last few years from a very militaristic organization to one that really does embrace the community, and I have to give much credit of that to first Chief Bratton and now Chief Beck, who really have taken on the issue of being community-oriented and working with the community instead of against it. It's been a remarkable change.
That has been a noteworthy change, and that's really a marvelous accomplishment, and hats off to LAPD for those very difficult changes. We have time for a couple more questions, so feel free to type them in the chat section, which is in the lower left corner of your screen. I have a question. So in choosing your indicators, you used correlation analysis to find those factors that are most strongly related to safety outcomes. And so that's probably a process that we would look at as well. We're also very fortunate to have had a study done by the Naval Postgraduate School where they looked at a number of factors, everything from housing to truancy, graduation rates, for example, and correlated those indicators with violent crime. So we have a bit of a start on that. Do you have any thoughts on looking at other indicators? Do you feel like your set of indicators is a pretty standard set that other cities should adopt?
I think we've looked at some of the other scorecards, including San Diego and some of the others. I think what's notable about this scorecard is that it takes community assets into consideration as well. So I think, this can be adapted, obviously, and it unfortunately has to be adapted to what's available to you. It sounds like you've got a pretty good start there of building your database. And once again, I don't know if you've looked at Healthy City to see what you can get there, but because now it's statewide, I'm sure there are other indicators. And you have only one school district in Salinas?
Oh no, we have quite a few school districts. So that's what I thought. That's why I thought that could perhaps be another unit of measuring or a proxy for neighborhoods.
Well, it certainly can, and if you can get your school districts to share their data with you, it may be helpful. And I think it's important to note what's different about what the schools are doing around the issue as well. So there may be some other indicators that you have that you could utilize, but I think ours are basic indicators, although the long iterative process that was gone through, I think, helped to refine those indicators that we found were collected and accessible and were correlated with the outcomes we were looking at. Everybody, I think, has to go through their own process and do their own lit review and then look at what's available to them. Unfortunately, I wish we had great data all over the state that we could get our hands on, but the other issue is how willing are people to share data with you?
And you, when you did your correlation, you correlated the factors with rates of violent crime. Is that correct?
We correlated, yes. So with, rates of violent crime, gang, violent homicide.
I think weren't there also some juvenile arrest data taken into account there?
Juvenile, no, actually, no, not juvenile arrest. But there was a whole host of data indicators that we correlated. I can't remember all of them off the top of my mind because there was like around 50 of them.
Oh my goodness.
But if you go on the Advancement Project website and just type in Community Safety Scorecard, you'll be able to download the report and you could see the entire list and the actual number, the statistical correlation, you could see it.
Yeah, and you can get it on the Advancement Project website or the Violence Prevention Coalition website. Both organizations have the entire report.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look forward to looking at the methodology in greater detail, and that's something that our epidemiologists at the health department are good at understanding. And we also appreciate the fact that we have your phone number and we'll give you a call.
Yeah, and I just to say once again, Paul Sue at UCLA, who's an epidemiologist as well, helped contribute to sort of the way this was looked at and looking at some of the methodology as well. So there are a considerable number of experts on this at AP, at UCLA, and at the VPC who can help if you have questions.
Okay, great. Georgina asked another question, and you mentioned San Diego. Has this scorecard approach been used in other cities?
There are different scorecards in different cities. I believe that part of the research done on this was looking at other scorecards across the country. And Maribel, I think you can speak more succinctly to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of scorecards out there, but this particular methodology, I'm not sure that it's been adopted by other cities, but like Billy said, there's San Diego, there's Alameda County that's done scorecards. There's very specific scorecards, like the Urban League did a report just for South LA. There's the Choices for Youth scorecard, the United Way scorecard, and county scorecards throughout the country that have done a similar kind of scorecard report, but I'm not sure about this particular methodology in measuring assets and conditions on the ground. I'm not sure that it's been adopted by other cities.
So yours has the advantage of looking at assets and protective factors, and you feel that's missing from a number of these other approaches?
Yes, I think it's missing from a number of the other scorecards we've looked at.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you. I don't see, let me follow up finally with Lynn McDonald's earlier question, which was, do you feel like either this process or your results were helpful in attracting funding to reduce violence?
I think that we have to go back to what Maribel said. Everybody else in the city was cut. This was not cut, and we are getting some additional funding for different segments of this project, of the GRID project. So we've been trying to enlist private foundations to help as well. And some of them are in different ways. Some of the place-based stuff being done by the California Endowment is linked very closely to some of the GRID programs. So new money is hard to find right now, but I think the fact that this hasn't been cut and has sustainable funding so far is really speaks to the value people place on it.
Absolutely, and I think that internally for us, it also has helped us identify the areas where we want to invest, our programming, and it has helped us, I think, in advocating for, particular programming. For example, we're trying to do safe passages programs in South LA and in East LA, and I think that this has helped us paint that picture, that there is a need there.
Yeah, and just to go along with that, and foundations have also looked at this, and so while they may not have specifically become part of this, they have invested and are looking at investing in the neighborhoods of greatest need.
Right.
I would think those results would look nice, though, in any grant application, because they're yeah. Well, Maribel, did you want to say anything about the future of the scorecard, that slide number 20, or do you feel like we've covered everything?
Yeah, I feel like I covered that section.
Okay, terrific. Well, I want to thank everybody that joined us. I hope you found it useful. I very much look forward to your feedback on the webinars. I'll send out an evaluation. And I want to thank our presenters, Billy Weiss and Maribel Mesa, for their excellent presentation. And we will explore what this technique has to offer to us and may give you a call.
Great.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good morning.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It went great. Oh,
it was just right.
It was fine. You did good. Oh, I'm so glad. The only thing is, I don't know what the deal was with that stupid poll. Why I was seeing the results page and not the questions page. That makes me.
Why did it still say recording?
Did I stop?
Can you turn it off, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Please stand by.